Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the what if. Ichigo woke up with a bit of a headache, but he felt remarkably rested given the circumstances. Zangetsu faded away now that he wasn't needed, and he replaced his zanpakutos on his back and at his hip. It felt weird not to have them at hand. He liked knowing he could defend himself at a moment's notice. He was distracted, barely exchanging a mouthful of words with Yoruichi before she left and returned with food. He was grateful she didn't bring up the night before. His pride might not have been able to take it, and he thought she understood. He would have plenty of time to deal with whatever fun new psychosis he was harboring once Aizen was dead. After a bite to eat, Ichigo raised his reiatsu again for Renji to find, and sat down with his zanpakutos in his lap in the stance for Jinzen. He was used to getting yanked in and out of his inner world, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd done it so formally. He was still awful at meditation, and by the time he calmed his rattled heart and got close, he sensed Renji's reiatsu nearby. He muttered a curse and opened his eyes, but didn't get up, watching as Renji made a characteristically loud entrance, an explosion raining down debris around the base of the ladder. He didn't have to bust up the hatch, stupid pineapple. Renji jumped, landing at the base of the ladder in a crouch. Dust cleared as the Fukutecho stood and hefted his zanpakuto to his shoulder. His voice echoed in the cavern. What's this? A secret underground training base? Ichigo's tone was flat when he called up to him. About time you found us, Renji. What was that? Ichigo wasn't really in the mood. He spoke fast. You came to tell us Rukia's execution date has been moved up to noon tomorrow and you want to practice Bankai, right? Get to it then. Renji sounded skeptical. How do you know that? Ichigo didn't feel the need to answer. He closed his eyes, content to ignore him, but his scowl deepened when Renji poked him in the head with his zanpakuto and taunted, "What, the Ryoka is too good for Bankai training? I already have Bankai." He didn't open his eyes, hoping he would just go away. Renji was taken aback, incredulous. What, you're joking? He leveled a flat stare at him, his reiatsu curling around him in annoyance. Do I look like I'm joking? Yoruichi seemed to be able to sense his mood better than Renji. She called out from across the training field in warning. Leave him alone, Renji. Renji didn't heed her warning, real irritation leaking into his voice. So you're going to waste time napping instead of training to save Rukia? Was that promise you made worth nothing? Ichigo had just about had it. He wasn't alone, sure, but was the only one that knew just how much was at stake if he failed. He couldn't fail, not again, but he wasn't sure if what he was feeling was confidence or denial. There was at least one thing he knew for sure, and that was his own power. Renji wanted to pick a fight, then so be it. He let his reiatsu go. He didn't even try to slow that metaphorical rope, he just let the weight fall, stopping it short of suffocating. Renji fell to his knees, sweat rolling up his face. It wasn't Shinigami reiatsu, it was hollow reiatsu, through and through. I'm meditating. He wasn't sure, but from the look on Renji's face, he thought his eyes might have changed. He was biased now. Seeing Zangetsu's eyes didn't frighten him anymore, they were simply familiar, but he knew from the outside, they were less than friendly. He didn't throw his power around for the fun of it. Despite his anger, there was a purpose. Renji didn't believe he was strong enough. He was a tactile sort of guy, but now he had proof. He pulled back his reiatsu, the collar taking the brunt of the work now that he wasn't fighting against it. Renji sucked in a breath now that he could, jumping back and brandishing his sword at him. What are you? You're clearly not the kid I fought a few days ago. He looked older, sure, but not enough to be confused with someone else, even if the first time Renji saw him in person it was dark and short-lived. Was he really that different? He was tired of keeping secrets from his friends, and it wasn't like Renji would magically not challenge Byakuya because he revealed when he was from. The idiot was far too stubborn for that. He knew he lost, but he respected Renji's feelings. That fight was his. He said, I think I'd know if I wasn't me. I'm Ichigo, I'm just a few years displaced. What does that even mean? Yoruichi appeared behind him, but he didn't look. She confirmed what he said. He's from the future. He's telling the truth. That's crazy. You're crazy. How? Not important. Ichigo cut him off, closing his eyes again. I'm a visored, a Shinigami hollow hybrid. A pissed-off visored, so let me meditate. Renji was silent for a moment, and Ichigo hoped that meant he would leave. He was mistaken. So you know what's gonna happen? Yes. Do we? Yes. Ichigo struggled to stay relaxed and manifested Zangetsu, which earned a startled yelp from Renji. Zangetsu sauntered closer, his eyes narrowed in the promise of violence. You really do wanna back off now? Go achieve Bankai. King's sorting out his headspace, makes him testy. The closer Zangetsu got to Renji, the farther away the Fukutecho moved, which was their plan to begin with. He'd really only done it to prove he'd mastered Bankai, so maybe he'd have more backing to his story. Renji summoned his own Zanpakuto spirit, and Ichigo thought that meant he was going to bugger off to train. He was wrong. He asked, "Why's your Zanpakuto look like you?" Visored. It was a half-truth, but neither Zangetsu nor Ichigo felt the need to elaborate. Hopefully he doesn't notice you only carry one sword and I carry two. That would be annoying to explain. Zangetsu disappeared back into his mind. He doesn't seem that sharp, but who cares, he's not one of the ones you need to hide that from, is it? Yoruichi spoke up from somewhere behind him. Actually, what are you doing? Ichigo had far more patience with Yoruichi than Renji. Renji hovered nearby to hear his answer, not that he cared. When I fight, he's going to be watching. I'll need to be able to holofi without raising too much suspicion. If he sees I've become a perfected hybrid, he may alter his plan. Consequently, dabbling around with my hollow powers makes me cranky, which is why I'm trying to do this in Jinzen. He raised his voice at the end for Renji's benefit. Napping. PSH. His abrupt reacquaintance with old memories hadn't helped his mood much either, but throwing his Reiatsu out of whack was what made him nearly lose his mind the first time around. Luckily, his hollow now had an understanding with him. This wasn't a struggle for control anymore, even if Zangetsu still insisted on calling him king. From what he understood, his relationship with his inner spirits was strange, but it worked well enough for him. Now can I meditate? There were no objections, so he pushed his heart back down towards his sword and his mindscape. It took a few minutes to relax enough to do it, but he managed. He opened his eyes in his inner world, almost nose to nose with Zangetsu. He flash-stepped back by instinct, but to his credit, he didn't yelp. Don't do that. His hollow's yellow eyes narrowed in a smirk, not in the least bit repentant. Ichigo looked around and noted the lack of Zangetsu no Asan. Where is he? Holding back your Quincy power for you since you suck at it. Oh, think you can be bothered to hold back so I don't fully transform? Just the mask. He crossed his arms and gave him a flatly judgmental look. It's your power, King. Ichigo sighed. You know what I mean. I can't let my Quincy Reiatsu out, which is usually how I'd suppress and control my hollow form. I've never held back both before, and even with the suppressor, pulling out my mask might break the thing. So fucking what? Zangetsu still failed to see how too much power was a problem. Aizen shows up right after you defeat Byakuya anyway. And back then Aizen knew I was weak. I don't know how he was watching me, but the fact remains that he was. His plans might change if he realizes he's underestimated me. He won't take it out on us, he'll go after my friends. You know the one I want to protect is you. Ichigo tightened his jaw, and Zangetsu matched his resolve with his own. This was an old fight, and a concept Zangetsu only swayed on when Ichigo's life wasn't on the line. You saw what happened when I lost everyone. Protecting them is protecting me. I ain't that complicated, King. I want you to live. You're alive, ain't cha? His face twisted into a snarl, baring blackened teeth and challenging Ichigo to fight him on it. Ah, I'm alive. This wasn't a fight he could win. His hollow was as stubborn as he was. He looked to the side, out at the stars and the skyscrapers that were slowly but steadily sinking into the sand, sinking deeper with every nightmare and doubt. He fought it, but after so long, he simply ignored it. That might not have been wise, but he didn't have time to stop and sort out his feelings. With this desert as the alternative, they almost missed the rain. The death of his sisters burned away his despair with the fire of rage, and what was left in the ashes was so much worse. He'd never recovered from that failure. Was this what you wanted? He knew it wasn't. He didn't expect an answer. Zangetsu's anger melted away, replaced with a look Ichigo understood, but couldn't name. They understood each other, because they were the same. Zangetsu wanted to protect him, and Ichigo's failure was also his failure. Byakuya wasn't a threat, giving in wasn't putting Ichigo at risk. "Ya wanna just pull our mask, practice. I'll hold back." Ichigo knew this fight wasn't over, it was only ever on hold. It would come back full force eventually. He felt the reserve of his Shinigami power recede even further, something that both Ichigo and Zangetsu didn't enjoy, but Ichigo knew it was necessary. "Thanks, Zangetsu. Don't thank me, ya fucking idiot. Get better." He sat to watch, a scowl on his face. Ichigo knew he hated this, at least he was humoring him. He didn't necessarily enjoy it either, but he needed to learn control eventually, and he'd never bothered. He finally understood Aizen, the bastard, when he goaded them on Sokyoku Hill. It was hard to hold back when you had so much power you could cleave mountains with a swing of your sword. He lifted his hand over his face in a claw and pulled. Black Reiatsu condensed underneath his palm and formed into a mask, two thick black stripes running down over each eye, cascading down over sharp cheekbones, bony teeth then over the jaw of the mask. Two bone-white bull horns cut forward from the mask in sharp angles with a vein of black running through them. Instead of the transformation ending at his mask, black lines cut down his neck, veering towards his chest. His hair lengthened, his fingers sharpening into claws, and he doubled over with a low, hollow-sounding growl of frustration. Zangetsu inversely mirrored Ichigo's transformation, a black mask with white stripes forming on his face. His eyes narrowed at the strain of limiting their reserves when their power multiplied. This was Zangetsu no Asan's specialty, especially after he'd been doing it for most of Ichigo's life. Zangetsu had never done the suppressing, he was always the one being suppressed. Even if he wouldn't admit it, this was practice for him too. Ichigo warred against his own power, straining to keep it limited without going berserk. Without his Quincy power to push against it, it was harder than he thought it would be. He felt the burning desire to fight, his hands tightening into fists. This was too much, all he wanted was the mask. "Gonna have to try harder than that, King. Shut up." His voice had the same distorted echo as Zangetsu. The black marks on his chest receded, but didn't go away. Even with Zangetsu holding back, controlling a power that wanted nothing more than to consume him was trying. He let it go completely, his mask shattering into fragments that disappeared once they hit the side of the skyscraper. The drain on his power was notable, but not immense. He had a feeling this was going to take a long time, and doing something in his inner world was always a bit different than trying it outside of it. Once he got the hang of it here, he would have to do it again outside. He reached to try again, the surge of his hollow Reiatsu once more rushing up to meet him like a hurricane. Renji achieved Bankai some hours later, leaving after a brief exchange of words with Yoruichi. She watched him go, then continued waiting for Ichigo. They had until noon the next day, and whatever Ichigo was working on, she wasn't privy to. Ichigo finally opened his eyes once it was already well into the night, and Yoruichi looked over in curiosity. "How did it go?" He got up, sheathing his swords in the bandage his shikai always manifested. "All right. Just all right." She got a bit closer, watching him for any sign of injury. "I need to try it outside my inner world, but I don't want to draw attention to myself. Can you shield my Reiatsu?" She narrowed her eyes in thought. "How much Reiatsu?" "A lot. If not all of it, I can get most of it." "How long?" He looked down and away, listening inward. "Hopefully only a few minutes." "Wait a moment." She started a Kido chant, flinging her arms outwards. The Kido formed a glowing yellow box around them, passing through boulders and rocks like they weren't there. She held her arms out, palms glowing yellow. "Go, Ichigo." He bent forward and warned, "Don't panic." She'd never seen this form, though he knew she knew about Arankar and Vizards. He thought a warning was only polite. His Reiatsu was normally a calm, heavy presence, but when he tensed his hand in a claw over his eyes, it grew darker, violent. He pulled his hand across his face, his hollow mask forming. He straightened and lifting a hand to his mask. It felt a bit different outside his mind, but it was stable. His transformation stopped at his mask, even if his power was still surging under the surface. He let out a heavy breath, his reiatsu pressuring the kido that bound him. He didn't like being trapped, it made him angry, and it was all too easy to accept that anger. Drown in it. He looked up at Yoruichi, yellow irises framed in black, her eyes wide. He was expecting that. He didn't really look like an ally when he was like this, and he thought this might be one of the first times she'd seen a visored in person. He let the mask shatter and forced the power away, content in the knowledge he could draw on it without completely transforming at all. It will get easier, Ichigo. The instant his dark reiatsu dissipated, she let the kido drop, trying not to show how shaken she was. Ichigo, what was that? Visored, remember, just making sure I can hold back. I don't want to kill Byakuya, I just need to win. He gave her space while she got absorbed the knowledge. How long until Rukia's execution? She answered tonelessly. 6 hours. Ichigo nodded, not looking forward to sleep, but if he wanted to be at his best, he'd need some before he faced Byakuya and Aizen. He needed to replenish his Raryoku. Attempting holofication for several hours was a bit exhausting. At least Renji was wearing down Byakuya a bit, and this time around, it wasn't his first time with a Bankai, and he was well aware of Byakuya's abilities, from his Bankai to his Kido. He didn't stand a chance. He turned his back to her, retreating to the side room to sleep. Then I'll see you in a few hours. She let him go without comment, and this time, Ichigo had Zangetsu take control. He could experiment with his nightmares later, but for now, he just needed to replenish his stamina. He was so close to killing Aizen he was nearly shaking with anticipation. Soon, King, sleep. Ichigo parted ways with Yoruichi sometime that morning, and he now waited a couple of miles away from Sokyoku Hill. His shunpo was quick enough to get him between the Sokyoku and Rukia in time, and he didn't want the captains to notice him. Sitting on his hands and waiting was harder than he thought it would be. He crouched, hand on the hilt of his Zanpakuto, as he took in the events on the hill. Waiting was agonizing. Just knowing Rukia was facing her death when he could stop it fed his guilt. He knew it was necessary. He wasn't nearly smart enough to predict how changes might affect the timeline. And so he waited. Even though he was over a mile away, Ichigo could see the fire and feel the power of the Sokyoku when it was fully released. He surged forward when it reared back to strike, the dead trees on Sokyoku Hill passing by in a nauseating blur. He stood on footholds of Reishi before Rukia, his hand on his Zanpakuto as the firebird clashed against the blade. He didn't even notice the pressure behind the flaming power. It was easy the first time around, but this time it was laughably so. If he hit it with a Getsuga, it would be ashes, but he waited for Shunsui Kyoraku Taicho and Jashiro Ukitake Taicho. Their so-called betrayal was important to distract Yama Jii as he fought Byakuya. It felt just as good the second time he was sticking it to Seraiti as the first time. The grin that spread across his face was genuine as he stared across at Rukia. His chest tightened, seeing her alive after so long, but he was far too happy to see her to let those feelings show. She opened her eyes in confusion, fully expecting to be dead. She blinked, and took in his silhouette in wide-eyed surprise. Yo, Ichigo. Her expression crumpled in pain, and his heart ached in empathy. He understood those feelings all too well, but he didn't let his confident smirk slip. Both of them couldn't fall to pieces. Rukia needed him, Orihime, Ishida, Chad, Renji, everyone. He couldn't slip, not yet. She gathered herself impressively fast. He'd always admired her strength. You idiot, why did you come here? You should know you can't defeat my brother. You'll be killed this time for sure. He was expecting her little tirade, and while her heart was in the right place, he knew he would win, just like he had known the first time he'd stood between Rukia and the Sokyoku. I'm resigned to my fate, I don't need you to rescue me. Go home. His smile softened to hear her shout at him again. It was skewed with her about to be executed, but he'd missed this. The Sokyoku backed off, but this time he expected it, swaying forward as it prepared to attack again. He turned, sword drawn, and prepared to counter, but he knew that unless something drastic had changed the timeline, Shunsui and Ukitake would pull through and destroy it. Come on. Ichigo, enough. He ignored her concerns just as baseless as the first time. You'll be torn to pieces. Ichigo. The Sokyoku lunged, and he braced himself in case they were late. The fiery inferno grew closer, his eyes narrowing in annoyance rather than concentration. Just like before, the rope spiraled around its neck, stopping it short. He watched as the two Taichos completed the ritual to destroy the firebird, the rope unraveling until it reached its neck, and the firebird burst, utterly destroyed. Fire rained down on the hill and he smiled. Good timing. He flipped back to land on the Sokyoku stand, raising his Zanpakuto and his Reiatsu with it to destroy the thing. Rukia cried, "Ichigo, what are you doing?" He swung his Zanpakuto by the bandages, answering, "Isn't it obvious, Rukia?" His Reiatsu spiked when he caught the handle, Zangetsu angled to strike. "Just shut up and watch." He drove it down into the stand with a nameless Getsuga Tensho. Blue energy ripped through it, obliterating any Kido in its way. The sound was deafening, a shockwave tearing through the sky around Sokyoku Hill, smashing straight through the plateau in an explosion of dust. The satisfaction of destroying the thing that was about to steal his friend away made his heart pound. Good riddance. He caught Rukia before she could fall, carrying her under his arm as he had the first time. She was so small, but he knew she wasn't weak. It pissed him off to know that she was helpless, nearly human, all by the hand of Seraiti and their fucking laws. She wasn't a criminal, she was a hero. She'd saved his family, she'd led him down the path that had granted him power. He'd failed once, but he wouldn't fail again, he wouldn't squander the gift she'd given him. Cleaver hefted on one shoulder, he groused, "Don't save me, you said, go home, you said. You talk too much, I already told you, I'm rejecting all your requests. I'm saving you, Rukia." He pretended not to notice her tears. "I'm not going to thank you, idiot." Ah, she deserved a minute, she thought she was going to die, and now she was saved. He knew how jarring that felt. Rukia, ever the voice of reason, voiced her concerns. "Ah, Ichigo, how are we going to escape?" "We'll run away. They're captains," she argued. "So we'll beat them up, then run away." He looked up. "It's not just me, it's Orihime, Ishida, Chad, Hanataro, Ganju, Renji. I'll rescue everyone, then we'll go home." His answer felt nostalgic, and his determination at backing up that promise was stronger than it had ever been. He noticed some action down below, smirking when he caught sight of Renji. He called, "Oi, I was wondering when you'd get here, Renji." Rukia called his name, more than surprised to see her friend than he was. The redhead called back. Who else was gonna rescue Rukia? He smiled and lifted Rukia by the belt, much to Rukia and Renji's panic. He threw Rukia straight at Renji, knowing they'd both be fine. Her screech echoed all the way to Renji's arms, crashing into him and sending them both flying. They shouted up at him in protest. He ignored their complaints and called out to Renji. "Don't let her go, no matter what." The reminder was enough to send Renji on his way, lifting Rukia in his arms and running for the edge of Sokyoku Hill. Again, Soifun ordered the Fukutechos to chase after him, and he was just as unimpressed now as he was in the past. In a single step, he was between them and his escaping friends. He spun his cleaver around, stabbing it into the ground. He stopped them all with well-placed attacks, shattering their Zanpakuto. It was pitifully easy. Even if they hit him, their Zanpakutos wouldn't have hurt him. They were so strong during the war, he'd nearly forgotten how weak they were before it. He felt a stab of guilt at how hard he hit one of them, annoyed that he couldn't remember the Fukutecho's name. He felt Byakuya closing the distance, lifting his Zanpakuto to block his attack. He faced the Taicho and smiled, thrilled by the look of confusion on the Taicho's face. Prick probably hadn't had his sword stopped like that in years. "Oi, is that all you've got, Byakuya?" Black and white, quote quote. He felt Byakuya closing the distance, lifting his Zanpakuto to block his attack. He faced the Taicho and smiled, thrilled by the look of confusion on the Taicho's face. Prick probably hadn't had his sword stopped like that in years. "Oi, is that all you've got, Byakuya?" Byakuya questioned, "Why?" Ichigo frowned at him, anticipating the question. "Why do you keep trying to save Rukia?" "I'll answer you with another question. Why aren't you trying to save her? Aren't you her brother? A brother is supposed to protect his sister." He pushed forward, forcing Byakuya to take a step back. "What a foolish question." Even if I told you, someone like you would never understand. Ichigo narrowed his eyes, feeling his rage spike into a near-tangible thing. You're right, I don't understand. So it seems talking is pointless. Ichigo thought he heard frustration in his voice, but he couldn't be sure. Their reiatsu clashed, flaring around their blades, both trying to pressure the other back. Rather, Byakuya tried, and Ichigo pretended to struggle. Ichigo let his rise, leaning against Byakuya's power. Byakuya's brow furrowed, not expecting to be pressured by a mere ryoka. Ichigo twisted the hilt of his sword, angling the blade so Byakuya's weight on his sword was forced downward. The blades of their zanpakuto slid, then grinded apart when Ichigo pushed forward. The concussion of power cracked the ground beneath their feet and both distanced themselves. Ichigo tightened his grip on Zangetsu and waited for Byakuya's next attack. Pretending to be weak was an insult to Byakuya, but one he couldn't help. Once he killed Aizen, there would be plenty of time for apologies. For now, he had his role to play and Kuchiki had his. Byakuya warned, I will kill you Kurosaki Ichigo. He shifted his grip on his sword, changing his stance, and this time, I'll execute Rukia myself. He tried to force away the feelings that clawed at his throat. He didn't understand how Byakuya could just let his sister die, how he would even be willing to do it himself. He felt like he was going to be sick, his stomach twisting into knots at the thought of hurting his own sisters. That glassy look in Yuzu's eyes. She was looking in his direction, but wasn't seeing. The gentle hum of her soul was missing, gone. It couldn't be gone, that meant he thought there would be more blood, she would have looked fine if it wasn't for King. The harsh, echoing tones of his hollow broke him from his thoughts with a jolt. His hands were shaking, and he willed them to stop. This was the first time he'd seen Byakuya in this timeline, and he wasn't expecting this to hit him so hard. He'd been angry the first time, but this was something deeper, darker. The feeling in his heart spread to his fingertips, trying to pull him into the void. His sisters were still alive. They were on summer break making memories. Karen was fighting low-level hollows with Don Kananji and Jinta, and Kazuki and his father were watching them. They were alive. Alive. Calm down. Calm down. His hands steadied, his reiatsu settling from its chaotic pitch into something purposeful. I'm not going to let you do that. He was confident in his ability to back up that promise, and it had little to do with the fact he knew he was stronger. Byakuya moved first, slow compared to the Byakuya he remembered. He matched his speed and dropped low, Zangetsu held parallel to the ground. The next blow was like the first, their swords clashed along with their reiatsu as Byakuya tested him for weakness. He could follow Byakuya's thoughts in the casual, but careful way he struck at him. He was wondering how a mere ryoka could match a nobleman, a taicho. A ryoka that he had, only days ago, effortlessly dispatched. He fell into a familiar dance of zanjutsu, easily countering Byakuya's attacks, much to the taicho's growing frustration. The shock of their swords clashing sang in his bones and his blood. He dodged as much as he parried, playing with Byakuya. Distantly, he noted the conflict happening closer to Yamajii and the other captains. Now that he didn't need to have so much focus on Byakuya, he realized what was happening. Yamajii chased after the other taichos, and Unohana took the Fukuteichos to the 4th division, he assumed. Yoruichi's sudden presence tackling Soifun wasn't shocking, but it wasn't something he remembered. He'd been so preoccupied with not dying the first time around, the background to his fight with Byakuya was all a blur. He bored of Byakuya's analytical nature and jumped back, feet sliding in the dirt. He spun his sword, resting it over his shoulders. You haven't even put a scratch on me yet. I thought you were going to kill me. He couldn't help some of the disgust in his voice. Despite his best efforts, the reason he was fighting Byakuya hadn't been forgotten. Is that all you've got? Show me your bankai, Byakuya. The first time around, he'd been eager, even cocky. Now he was both angry and impatient. I'm going to crush it. The taicho scowled, and Ichigo hoped his pride was suffering. The bastard shouldn't feel an ounce of pride for what he'd almost let happen. What he insisted was his duty. Your words are cheap. Talk all you want, it won't change Rukia's fate, or your own. The noble raised his sword in front of his face, light catching the edge of the blade. Chire, Senbon Sakura. From the top to the hilt, the blade scattered into hundreds of petals, light glinting off the blades like sakura blossoms. They swirled around him in a spiral that was actually rather beautiful. Ichigo wondered how someone as rigid and seemingly heartless as Byakuya could have such a pretty, yet deadly Zanpakuto. He waited for the cascade of deadly petals to grow closer, then brought his Zanpakuto down in a rather tame Getsuga Tensho. Pale blue Reiatsu arced from the edge of his blade, smashing through Byakuya's Shikai with pure power. His attack cut a deep swath through the rock, grazing Byakuya and dissipating over the edge of the plateau. Blood pattered on the ground, Byakuya's arm and sleeve torn and bloody. It was easy to scatter his blades when he fought him the first time, and it was easy now, but the look on Byakuya's face was still priceless. Slowly, his Shikai gathered itself, forming back into a sword. The Shinigami stared at him in wide-eyed shock. Is that the power of your Zanpakuto? Ah, Ichigo replaced his Zanpakuto on his shoulder. I can keep this up all day. Can you show me your Bankai? While it would be entertaining to show Byakuya his own Bankai, it wasn't the time nor the place. Byakuya scowled across the expanse at him, then lifted the blade, point down before him. Very well, if you wish for it so strongly. Behold, my Bankai. He let the sword go, and as it hit the ground it appeared to sink into the ground and dissolve into light. Great blades rose up from the ground in rows, extending back into space, then dissolved into many billions of flower petal-like blades. Ban. Kai. Ichigo leaned forward, his hand tightening on the hilt. He was strong, but Byakuya's Bankai was still formidable. Senbon Sakura Kujiyoshi. The petals formed into waves of metal death rushing forward in glinting pastel waves. Ichigo disappeared, reappearing several yards above Sokyoku Hill. The petals adjusted their course to chase him, but they were still too slow. He swung his sword, attacking with a Getsuga. The petals blocked his attack, morphing into a wall, then congealed to attack. He disappeared, reappearing behind him. Byakuya turned, and he knew the Taicho hadn't been able to follow him. The streams of flower petals trailed his movement, still too slow. He didn't have any intention of going into Bankai. He couldn't. Not without either revealing what he was or revealing his Quincy power. He didn't want Seraiti to know about that power. Not yet. He lurched forward into a run, well aware his speed was impossible to follow. Byakuya's eyes widened, lifting his hands to direct his Bankai more directly. He sped up, but even with so many blades and an increase in speed, Byakuya couldn't catch him. He stopped inside Byakuya's guard, right behind him. His sword was lowered. He didn't need it for this. His fingertips rested right above his heart, his voice flat. Dead. He was gone before Byakuya even turned to attack, flower petals slicing nothing but air. He spoke again from in front of Byakuya, now several yards away. Not bad, but you're still slow. The Taicho whirled to face him. He scowled. Miracles only happen once. Miracles aren't real. The only truth is power. His answer seemed to unsettle Byakuya. It implied Ichigo was inherently stronger. Ichigo hunched forward, lifting his hand in a claw over his face. He watched him from between his fingers. I'll only show you once. He felt Zangetsu's power rise up to meet his Reiatsu twisting and becoming black and red. He raked his hand down, Reiatsu congealing into a striped mask on his face. His horns pointed directly at the Taicho, yellow eyes glowing from behind his mask. Byakuya stiffened instinctively, eyes wide, pulling the blossoms around him in defense. He could kill him, and it would be so easy. Scared, Byakuya. His voice was hard to read beneath the echoing tones so reminiscent of Zangetsu. His hollow was surprisingly silent, but he knew it was taking a lot of effort to hold themselves back. What are you? Does it matter? He didn't use Shunpo. He didn't need it to outpace Byakuya as he was now. He advanced, closing the distance between them in a single step, appearing to Byakuya to vanish. He angled his sword up to slash his chest, bold enough to not give a damn about defense. He couldn't use a Getsuga without killing him. His attack was merely a byproduct of swinging his sword. Byakuya's petals congealed into a defensive wall, but it wasn't enough to stop the pressure from his attack. It sent Byakuya sliding back several feet on his heels, petals scattering as his Reiatsu was disrupted by Ichigo's own. Blood splashed on the ground from the cuts he took from his Reiatsu, his expression filling with shock. The Taicho lifted his hands to gather his defense once more, but Ichigo gave him no time to prepare. He slashed at him again, and again, the number of petals steadily decreasing as they were crushed under his attacks. He felt his control slipping with each swing of his sword. Byakuya was being shredded by his attacks, his Shihakusho in tatters. His grip on his Bankai slipped, his Reiatsu too low to maintain it. His sword returned to Shikai, blocking Ichigo's assault the best he could, but he was visibly pushed back. He waited for Ichigo to get close, and in the gap between his battering strikes, he pointed his finger at him and said, "Hado number 4 Byakuya." Lightning crackled from his finger towards Ichigo's heart. He didn't bother blocking with his sword, he batted the Kido away with his bare hand, the energy sizzling out in a cascade of sparks. Byakuya wasn't expecting his attack to be so easily destroyed, and now he was wide open. He advanced without pause, raising his sword and bringing it down at a diagonal. Byakuya raised his sword to block at the last second, but Zangetsu cleaned straight through without any resistance at all. He slashed straight across his chest, blood spraying from the wound. If he wasn't holding back, he would have killed him, but his blow barely grazed him. "You went too easy on him. He's not our enemy." He lowered his sword, glaring across at Byakuya. He could tell he struggled to stay standing, but his pride and force of will held him up. His eyes narrowed in irritation, looking down at his broken Zanpakuto. "You win, Kurosaki." Ichigo lowered his sword, the point dipping towards the ground. He let his mask dissipate, having no intention of pursuing the Taicho. He wanted to win, and he'd done so. He was restless, eager for his fight with Aizen, but he shoved off the brutal nature of his hollow power anyway. He turned to the side and sheathed his sword, making it clear their fight was over, and Byakuya retreated in a buzz of shunpo. His heart was racing, his hands clenched into fists. So close, so close, so close. "Stay calm, Ichigo. I know, Asan." But knowing what he needed to do and actually doing it were two different things. He'd always been an instinctual fighter, and now his instincts were betraying him. Ganbari Masu. He could feel the presence of his friends at the edge of the clearing. Ishida, Sato, Ganju, Orihime. Even Yakiru and that guy. They were too far away during the fight to see him before, but now that his and Byakuya's power had died down, they ventured closer. They shouldn't be here, they would only be in the way. He felt a flicker of guilt at the thought, but it was no less true. The only one of his friends that might have been able to breathe if he raised his Reiatsu was possibly Ishida, but he was without his powers. When they couldn't feel his power, it wouldn't matter, but unless they were above the level of a captain, he could hurt them on accident. Control was never his strong suit. He looked over at his friends, and whatever they saw on his face, they stopped short, uncertain. The only one who seemed to still be happy was Yakiru. He closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. Calm down. He forced his hands to relax, but his nerves were still as hot as a live wire. He looked back over at them and offered a small, slightly disappointed smile. "What are you doing here?" Ishida gave him a thoughtful look while Orihime fumbled for words. "Ah well, Kenpachi helped us escape and then this other guy started to fight him, and we wanted to be sure you were okay. But it looks like you're fine." He knew they felt the change in his Reiatsu, but to his relief, none of them seemed willing to ask about it. "Yeah, I'm okay." He looked over Ganju and Ishida. It was weird seeing Ishida in Shinigami Black, he knew how much the Quincy must hate it. If he hadn't just broken out of prison, he might have stopped for a chance of clothes. "You guys look like shit." Ishida pushed up his glasses, a little self-conscious, clearly. He shot Ganju a glare, left over from an argument Ichigo hadn't been privy to. "Well, at least I won my fight." Ganju scowled. "Well, if I'm alive, that counts as a win in my book." Figures, the two would fight. Ishida didn't seem to get along with anyone in his family. He looked Orihime over. "Are you okay?" She blushed, gesturing wildly. "I was kind of useless, but Ishida protected me. Zaraki carried me around. I'm fine." She appeared to still have a crush on him, which was a shame. His eyes flicked over to Ishida, noticing how he watched her. He was there for her, he lost her powers to protect her, and she hadn't even noticed. She was a smart girl, but just as blind as he was. I'm glad you're all right. I'm sorry. He cut her off before she could get started, sighing. Thank you, Inu. His tone was gentle, careful. This wasn't the strong, headstrong Orihime he knew. It was strange to see her so uncertain. It might be too late to tell them to run away, they just weren't fast enough for how much time was left. Shit. He looked finished his fight with Byakuya with some time to spare, but things might be different now. Guys, this isn't over. He looked vaguely in Renji's direction, sensing him across Seraiti. He resisted the urge to draw his sword. Calm. Ishida asked, what do you mean, Kurosaki? He chose his words carefully, turning back to look at them all equally. I know how hard you worked, I know how badly you want to help, but please. I'm asking you to run away. I don't want to hurt you, or see you hurt, or killed. Orihime's expression grew pained, smiling, but there was no joy in it. I see. We would just be in the way. He knew she understood, but that didn't make it sting any less. He steeled his resolve, not backing away from their feelings, their losses, or their pride. He knew this would be meaningless to Ganju, but he would know soon anyway. I got to see you all become so strong. It was an honor to fight with you then, and I know it will be an honor to fight with you again, so I'm asking you to wait. His eyes lingered on Ishida, the implication he would regain his powers and then some in his gaze. To his surprise, Sato spoke first. We'll be waiting for you, Ichigo. When? The giant held up his hand in a thumbs up. Orihime's smile was less shaky. Kurosaki-kun. Ishida straightened. I have questions for you, Kurosaki. Don't go and get yourself killed before you can answer them. Ganju muttered, I have no idea what's going on. Ichigo's mouth turned up into a small smile. Ah, now get out of here. Yakiru waved and screamed goodbye from Sato's shoulder. They turned and ran for the edge of Sokyoku Hill, and it wasn't long before he was left standing in silence, the wind on the hilltop quietly howling. He hated this place. This was the place he'd learned Aizen's plans for him. The place his friend was almost executed, and the place that traitor had set on his path to destroying everything precious to him. He wanted to draw his kyber blade, but he needed his hands free. He knew that no matter what, Aizen had to come here. He was planning on negation for a quick escape, and with his plan to have Rukia executed failed, he would come here himself to remove the hogyoku from her body before he fled. He wasn't going to let him touch Rukia, especially not when he knew he'd had to steal Kazuki's technique to remove the damn thing. Kazuki could fix her, and it would be far less traumatic than watching Aizen stick his hand into his friend's chest, her soul. The Kido-powered announcement from Aizen echoed in his head. Attention, all Gote 13 captains, lieutenants, and all Ryoka. This is Squad 4 Aizen Katetsu Fukutecho. This is an emergency announcement from both me and Unohana Retsu Taicho. Everything I am about to tell you is the truth. Ichigo tuned her out and readied himself. He knew Aizen's betrayal inside and out. He only had another moment left. He let his power spike. About fucking time. The collar suppressor dissolved under the sudden flood of his Reiatsu, rising too quickly to contain it. His power soared, but it was too late for Aizen to back out now. He was standing a few hundred yards beneath his escape route. He wouldn't get away thawed. He was going to die here, and never hurt anyone again. He closed his eyes and focused, waiting. His heart hammered in his ears, but he paid careful attention to any differences in power around him. For a moment, there was silence, then the whirl of a powerful Kido. The instant the Aizen and Jin appeared on the hilltop, Aizen's eyes were on him. He knew the man too well, he could see the confusion and curiosity in his eyes. It was the same curiosity a cat might show a butterfly before it flattened it underfoot. He wasn't the weak Ryoka boy he'd been when he fought him the first time around. This was an unevolved Aizen. He was weak. As he was now, the traitorous captain wouldn't even be able to fathom his Reiatsu. He seemed harmless when his Reiatsu couldn't be sensed, but he could see the man's instincts warning him of a threat. He disappeared, reappearing just inches from Aizen. His hand was clamped down like a vice on his Zanpakuto, not allowing him to draw it. He caught the wrist of his right hand before he could react, cracking his bones in his grip. The look on Aizen's face was one of shock and incomprehension. Ichigo had been in one place, and then he had simply appeared before him. Aizen's left hand snapped out and grabbed his throat in retaliation, and Ichigo's eyes burned in fury. He'd grabbed him by the neck before, and he'd hated it then too. His reiatsu thickened like fog around him, and even if Aizen couldn't feel it, now he would see it. He flickered back, Kyoka Suigetsu clenched tightly in one hand, and drew his kyber sword. He wanted to use all of his power, but he still couldn't let Soul Society know about his Quincy power. It was bad enough they knew about his holo. Aizen's eyes widened further, beginning to understand Ichigo was a threat. The power Aizen had observed in the human world didn't even compare to the power he was demonstrating now, and he knew this information confused the genius greatly. Jin seemed torn on whether to keep up his cover or back up Aizen, and he settled for Shikai and a concerned stance. Ichigo sensed Renji, Rukia, and Tosen appear behind him, having placed himself between where they would appear and Aizen on purpose. He had a feeling Aizen's pride and arrogance would remove the focus from anyone but him, but he'd rather be careful. Aizen's expression twisted into one bordering on rage. You have no reiatsu. How? He couldn't help but taunt him. Aizen has found something he doesn't understand. How must that feel, to come to the sudden realization that you are weak? He could feel the captains converging on their location. He didn't have long, soon the negation would take him away and he'd be gone. He didn't have to hold back, he wanted to crush him. He heard Zangetsu's laughter echo in his head, a savage, eager sound. His power coiled around him in jagged lines of darkness, then surged over his skin, his resurrection flooding his veins with power. His mask formed, a hollow hole gaping in his chest with black lines drawn out and up to his neck. His hair grew long, nails stretching into claws. Aizen put distance between them, moving too quickly for the others to see, but to his eyes, he was slow. Disarmed and outmatched, the ex-captain gestured with his hand and snapped, Hado 90 Kurohitsugi. The darkness closed around him in a box, swords of power impaling through it. Ichigo narrowed his eyes in disgust. Even a full incantation Kurohitsugi wasn't enough to slow him down, this was just pathetic. Compared to the Aizen he'd known, this was almost too easy. He swung his sword and it shattered, shards flying in all directions. The ground cracked under his feet, the dust blown away from the hill by the shock. He moved. Aizen was unprepared when Ichigo's hand grabbed his face, his glasses disintegrating when they made contact with his reiatsu. Aizen's fingers dug into his arm, powering Aikido with his left hand, but he wasn't strong enough to dislodge his grip. The fact he hadn't simply shattered his skull when he grabbed him was a testament to his power, to what he would eventually become if he wasn't stopped. This all happened in a matter of seconds. He felt Jin and Tosen release their swords, but they were still of little consequence. He charged a Sero between his horns, holding Aizen off the ground with a tight grip on his head. His claws dug down to the bone, blood sheeting down the side of Aizen's neck. He didn't want to hear him speak anymore. He met Aizen's eyes from between his grip on his face, the rage and hatred he saw there a reflection of his own. His friends were still alive. His family, Soul Society wasn't in shreds. He had something to protect again, and he had the pain of failure backing his resolve. Sokyoku Hill was flooded with the oppressively dark light of his Gran Rei Sero. Shadows lengthened and cast the hill in red light as it charged between his horns. He felt Aizen's reiatsu flare to crushing heights, his power whipping around them both, but it didn't move him any more than a mountain might be pushed by the wind. Whatever Kido he cast exploded in yellow light around them both, but his Sero still charged unimpeded. Part of him was disgusted, but another, deeper part felt a thrill. Aizen was like a pinned butterfly, already dead, but it didn't understand. Jin's sword struck him in the lower back, but the blade couldn't hurt him. He didn't even look, he only had eyes for Aizen. This was the Shinigami who stole his family from him, who would steal them from him again, but now he could win, he could kill him. His tone was guttural and dark. I see you, Aizen. He saw who he really was, he understood him better than anyone ever had. His pride, his arrogance, his power. And now he was going to kill him again. In the end, you didn't even want your power. He shot the Sero point blank, the beam of dark, red energy slicing straight through Aizen into the sky, dissolving the clouds. The shockwave nearly leveled the trees on Sokyoku Hill, nearly all those present on the plateau struggling to remain standing. The sky seemed to burn, but he didn't stop there. He threw him to the ground and it cratered under the impact. Aizen's bare chest was doused in his own blood, a hole through his guts. Somehow he was still alive, eyes wide in fury. He stared at him with such hatred. This Aizen didn't know who he was, he couldn't know. Ichigo didn't give him time to recover, taking Zangetsu and driving it home in his chest, straight through his heart. Getsuga Tensho. Power rippled and split the ground beneath Aizen, his attack shredding the former Taicho from the inside out. Red swaths of Reiatsu bubbled from the rocks, shattering the ground. Chunks of rock along the edge of Sokyoku Hill split and fell, the ground scarred irrevocably from his power. There was no coming back from this, Aizen would have to be dead. He raised his sword to attack again, paranoid he'd somehow failed. The dust cleared, revealing Aizen's bloody, mangled body beneath him. He didn't lower his sword, his grip so tight his own claws cut into his skin. The wind tugged his hair around his shoulders, the wind rough now that air rushed to fill the space his Sero had just forced away. That's enough, Ryoka. He was surprised to hear the Saudaicho speak. He supposed he shouldn't be, he'd known he was here, he was in charge, but it was always uncomfortable to be scrutinized so closely. Seconds ticked by, then, slowly, he lowered his sword, aware he was far from alone on that hilltop. He tossed away the dead zealot's Zanpakuto, not wanting to touch the thing any longer than he had to. He distantly heard Tosen's outraged cry, and he caught his sword in his hand without needing to look. He felt the concussion of sound his Shikai created, but it rolled off him and his power. He fixed Tosen with an annoyed glare, the blind Shinigami screaming again in rage. Ichigo's tone was flat. Stop. He tightened his hand, breaking Tosen's Zanpakuto like it was made of glass. Before Tosen could do more, the blind Shinigami found Yoruichi's sword at his throat, and Soifan's at his gut, forcing him to cease, or die. He took in the scene around him. All the captains were on guard besides the Saudaicho. He wasn't sure if they would attack, so he slowly sheathed his sword. That he didn't appear to be berserk was enough to make most of them relax, particularly those he knew were on his side, like Ukitake, Yoruichi, and Kyoraku. He saw that Matsumoto had her sword at Jin's throat, but he already knew he wasn't a threat anymore. Both were quietly talking, but they were too far away to hear. He noticed how Byakuya was situated in front of Renji and Rukia, the scattered petals of his Shikai littering the ground at his feet. Even if he was in poor shape, he'd left him in one piece, anticipating this. If he hadn't been there to protect Rukia with her already depleted Reiatsu, he didn't know how bad it could have gotten. He glanced back down at Aizen like he was afraid he would come back to life. He was expecting him to regenerate, finding it hard to grasp the fact he had yet to accept the hogyoku. King, he's ain't getting back up. Is it wrong that I'm almost disappointed? Bastard was weaker than I remembered. The sky suddenly split open, Jillian's writhing in the gash between worlds. However the ex-Taicho had gotten the Manos to open the negation for him, it no longer mattered. They sought out their targets, apparently not caring Aizen was already dead. Ichigo was ready. He parted his jaws in a roar that shook with power, the Manos and Jillian slinking back into the Valley of Screams. They were cowed, but they were still stupid things, they wouldn't go away unless he forced them. He lifted a hand, reaching with his instincts in the hole in the world. He closed his hand into a fist, sealing off the Garganta with force of will. He could feel the shock and caution rolling off of the Taichos and Fukutechos behind him. He understood he was an unquantifiable threat, but he still felt more alone than he ever had. People he'd known to be friends, mentors, comrades, they regarded him as an enemy. He lowered his hand, turning to face the others. Ukitake's voice carried, even though they were so far apart. Who are you? He looked back and lifted his mask, still moving slowly. A couple of captains looked twitchy, and he didn't want to fight his allies. Kurosaki Ichigo. Soifan shouted, Kurosaki Ichigo is human. You are decidedly not. Yamamoto shouted, enough. Treat the wounded, take these two traitors to Senzaiku Shishinro. He opened an eye to regard Ichigo. I will deal with Kurosaki. Ichigo's eyes widened a bit. Before he'd been beneath Yamamoto's notice, but now he was upgraded to name status. He let his hollow power go, his hair returning to normal length, the black in his sclera receding. His eyes were no longer yellow, but soft brown. His reflexes were still humming from battle, feeling surprisingly unsated. Yamamoto walked forward while the captain scrambled to follow orders. The captain commander walked past Ichigo to the edge of the battered plateau. Ichigo took the hint and followed, not entirely sure where to go from here. This is as far as his foreknowledge was of any considerable value. Now things would be different, and he didn't know his place in this world anymore. He stood beside Yamamoto as he looked out over Soul Society, waiting for the ancient Shinigami to speak. The sun was beginning to set, brilliant golden light highlighting the contours of the destruction Ichigo had wrought. Kurosaki, you don't match early reports of your power, you don't look like the teenager we surveilled a month ago. Who are you? He looked at the commander, sensing this question was digging for more than his name. I'm Ichigo. I was a substitute Shinigami, a brother, a friend. I'm a protector, a visored, and at one point, a captain. He looked over at Rukia, who was kneeling by her brother's side. I'm not sure what you want me to say, Yama-jii. The man leaned forward on his cane, seemingly understanding Ichigo's implications. Is this the result of that man's invention? He was talking about Kazuki's hogyoku, and he didn't come right out and ask if it was time travel, but when the Dongai was well known for displacing time, it wasn't an impossible conclusion. Ichigo wasn't sure if he was looking for a report or a simple answer, but he'd never been sure how to act around Yamamoto. He'd defied nearly every order he'd given him at first. It had taken years for him to see the wisdom in his actions and the coldness in them. Yes. Where is the hogyoku now? Ichigo saw no reason to lie about this. The hogyoku couldn't be destroyed, only hidden. It would need to be kept safe, and he knew Yamamoto could be neutral in the guarding of something so powerful. It's inside Rukia's soul. Urahara can remove it, but only if she comes back to Karakura. The last bit was a bit of a lie. Yamamoto grunted in understanding, no doubt planning for her escort. They stood in silence for some time, and Ichigo had a feeling he was waiting for him to continue. When I'm from Aizen 1. He killed my family, he destroyed Karakura. He killed Renji, Rukia, Hitsugaya, Byakuya, he killed almost everyone. Saraiti was conquered, he nearly succeeded in creating the king's key. That word alone had Yamamoto fixing him with a hard look. How many others have you told? You're the only one I've told about the key. Trust me, I know how important it is. I won't tell anyone, Yama-jii. A wise choice, Kozu. And he was downgraded to boy once again. Why does Saraiti have your loyalty? Aizen targeted my home, my friends, my family. Saraiti is an extension of that. The number of people I want to protect keeps growing. He looked over at the captain commander. He knew why he was asking, and this talk was only happening because he'd proven to be stronger than everyone in the Gote 13. I'm not a threat to Saraiti. The fact remains that in this world you were a Ryoka, and you defeated lieutenants and captains with ease. You killed a captain of unknown power and ended a rebellion that would have done irreparable damage to Soul Society and the human world. Ichigo kept his voice low. It's not over Yama-jii. He's got an army of Arankar in Hueco Mundo, and I don't know what they'll do now that he's dead. Yamamoto mulled this over, then asked, what will you do? Recruit the Vizards. This got his attention. I forgot you didn't know. The Vizards weren't changed by choice. Aizen framed Kazuki, and Kazuki did what he could to keep them alive. They did nothing wrong. He couldn't help but defend his friends. They were like him. He couldn't help but feel a certain kinship. Yamamoto considered this, then looked out over Saraiti. We owe you a great debt, it would seem. You and the other Ryoka may stay and recuperate before returning to the human world. Ichigo didn't like collecting on debts, but he knew it would only be an insult to their pride if he didn't accept. Ah, thanks, Yama-jii. I expect a full report, Kurosaki. He fixed him with a steady look. I'll meet with you tomorrow evening. He had no doubt there was a lot to be done with all the recent chaos. A day wasn't that long to wait at all. He had a feeling Yamamoto was aware he would be omitting some details and information, but for the moment, he seemed to grudgingly accept that. The Saotaicho walked back to the others, shouting a few more orders and having his lieutenant send hell butterflies to the absent divisions. He does not trust you, Ichigo. You have shown yourself to be merciless and powerful, nor have you shown to have any sort of respect for authority. Be cautious. If he decides to outmaneuver me, what could I do? He has centuries on me. But if the old bastard wants to fight, we'll win. This is pointless. We're not going to fight him, we're on the same side. But if we do, not gonna happen, Zangetsu. There was a lot of upset grumbling, but that was the end of that. Ichigo didn't move just yet, sensing Ishida, Orihime, and Sato, returning to the top of Sokyoku Hill. He assumed Yakiru and Ganju had decided to get going now that things were settled. He waited for them, wanting a few more minutes alone. He noticed Rukia and Byakuya talking and left them be, glad Byakuya had again made peace with himself and Rukia. He didn't feel like he'd won. The mood was somber and subdued, and the Shinigami on the hilltop avoided him like he was some kind of monster. So nothing had changed. If ya didn't scowl like that, maybe they wouldn't be so piss-scared. So I should smile like you. Zangetsu cackled. Just like that, King. He couldn't decide if he was making fun of him or trying to make him feel better. He watched the 4th Division run around treating Komamura, Renji, Byakuya, and everyone affected by simply being too close to his battle with Aizen. That word felt wrong. It wasn't a fight, it was just plain murder. The sun was nearly set by the time his friends made it back over to him, the 4th wrapping up their field treatments to move their patients to the 4th Division. Orihime told him on the way back up, Yakiru had gotten a hell butterfly, then offered to let them all stay in the 11th Division barracks until they returned to the human world. He caught their eyes slipping over to Aizen's bloodied body, but the sun was low enough that any detail of that slaughter was cast in shadow. He knew Orihime tried to brush it off, but was struggling to keep her composure. Ishida said nothing, he only watched Ichigo in contemplative silence. They retreated to the barracks, the conversation staying light, recounting what had happened while they were separated, then lapsing into uncomfortable silence. The streets were still rather busy after all the commotion they had either caused or been a part of. Keto-powered light flickered on along the path, but the streets were still dark. Ishida finally broke the silence. Kurosaki, do you plan on working with Soul Society? Ichigo stopped abruptly. Ishida, this isn't the place. He gave him a warning look, aware Mayuri could very well be listening in on them without their knowledge. There were some things he wasn't willing to share with Soul Society just yet. Ishida seemed to understand, but the frustration was clear on his face. His tone eased, looking between them. Look, I don't know the future anymore. Not really. My knowledge is next to useless now. He could feel the distance between them. It was uncomfortable knowing the people he'd once been so close to were only alive in his memories. He sighed, looking up at the stars. These were different from the ones in his inner world, these were actually calming. They put things into perspective. He looked back at his friends, changing the subject for the moment. You want to be strong, don't you? I can help. He didn't want to do this alone. He could try, but he knew he would fail. Orihime took a step forward, the resolve in her eyes reminiscent of the Inu he remembered. Kurosaki-kun, I want to protect Tatsuki, I want to help you, everyone. Ishida's brows furrowed, his attention suddenly on her. Inu. Ichigo's lips turned up into a faint smile, thinking of Haki. I know someone who can help you. When we get back to Karakura, I'll take you to see him. He turned his attention to Ishida. You need to speak with your father. Ishida's eyes widened, clearly less than thrilled. Ichigo left that hanging and looked to Sato. I can help you with your power if you want, but to be honest, you did a pretty good job on your own. You're a full-bringer, by the way. Full-bringer. Long story, but if you want my help, you can have it. Sato tensed and said nothing, but Ichigo sensed that was a firm yes. He would need to take him to Hueco Mundo, and thankfully finding a patch of unoccupied sand in that place was relatively simple. I wasn't being flattering earlier, you guys get strong, but you need to be stronger. He considered what he could tell them that wouldn't be compromising if he was being spied on. Aizen's army still exists, but they're far less motivated than Aizen was to infiltrate the human world, and they don't share his ideals. Although after they fight out who's in charge, I don't think they'll just sit on their ass. They hate Shinigami. That said, I think we have time before that happens. He put his hands on his hips with a huff. It's late, it's been a very, very long day. Let's just get to the barracks so we can get some sleep. I promise I'll answer your questions. Tomorrow. There was an edge of authority on his voice they weren't used to hearing, a remnant of barking orders in the war. There were no complaints, all of them looked as exhausted as he felt. All that tension he'd had over fighting Aizen was gone, and that same bone-deep weariness took the place of his rage. They got to the 11th Division barracks in a few minutes, one of the few places in Seraiti he knew inside and out. A member he didn't know by name led them to their quarters, uncertain what to do when Ichigo demanded his own room. It didn't seem to matter if he was a member of the 11th Division. Ichigo's description had gotten out and the Shinigami was so flustered he couldn't figure out what to do with himself. Ichigo was just about to leave when Ikkaku turned the corner. "Oi, Ichigo." He turned, surprised to see him on his feet so soon. "Ikkaku. What's the deal?" Ikkaku strode up to his group, looking over his friends with a critical eye, then dismissed them. Ichigo said, "I want my own room." Ikkaku looked at Ishida, then Sato, not seeing anything wrong with the two. Why? Ichigo clearly wasn't a self-entitled prick. Ikkaku didn't see a problem. Ichigo's frown deepened, not wanting to let the entire world in on his shortcomings. "You know what, whatever. I'll sleep outside." He turned to go, Ikkaku's voice behind him. Hey, you think the 11th can't give the guy that beat the hell out of our captain a fucking room? Who do you think we are? Ichigo stopped, annoyed. "Well then give me a room, Baldy." "What?" Ikkaku reached for his Zanpakuto, and Ichigo tried not to roll his eyes. Orihime gestured wildly, flustered. "Ah, it's fine. We can just share and let Kurosaki have the other." Ikkaku grabbed Ichigo's arm and dragged him down the hall, angrily muttering. He left Ichigo's friends behind, leaving them standing in the hallway with their escort. He tossed Ichigo into an empty room. He was suddenly serious. "Why, Ichigo?" Ichigo let Ikkaku manhandle him and shrugged. "Used to sleeping alone is all." Ikkaku didn't sound sold on the excuse. "Whatever. Get some sleep. I'm sure Zaraki will be looking for you tomorrow." "Good night." Ikkaku snorted and slammed the door on Ichigo, leaving the Visored standing in the dark. "That could have gone better. You should tell your friends the truth." "I'm not lying to them." "Ichigo." He frowned, aware Zangetsu no Asan wasn't going to take any excuses. He didn't dwell on it, removing his Zanpakuto and lying down on the bed he rolled out. Zangetsu. The switch was easy, and Zangetsu didn't object. He was ashamed he needed to do this. He didn't want his friends to know. He didn't want to hurt anyone again, and despite his exhaustion, he knew his emotions were raw. Inside his inner world, there was silence, but as he finally slipped into sleep, the wind howled. Gemist. Ichigo woke to the sounds of Bakken clashing in the training grounds. Rather, Zangetsu woke up and they traded places. It was still barely light out, and rather than wander around a half-empty division, Ichigo did push-ups and sit-ups, going through his exercises before he finally ventured from his room. He had Zangetsu with him, unsure if it was still considered wartime and that was allowed, but not really caring either way. If they wanted to disarm him he would have to be heavily persuaded. He went to the dojo to watch, taking up a spot in the corner and out of the way. Everyone turned to look at him and he challenged them with a scowl. He was promptly ignored, and they all went back to training. He folded his arms and leaned against the wall, scanning the Shinigami and only recognizing a couple. He watched them spar, judging them as critically as possible, and he could tell that they noticed. They seemed to be unusually focused, treating it more like an exam than casual training. Ichigo was a bit surprised when one of them got the balls to go up to him to ask him to spar with them. After he'd been oozing hollow Reiatsu all night, he thought the kid had some real guts. He agreed, catching the Bakken that was thrown at him. The others kept sparring, but it was obvious their attention was on the two of them. They were curious about the hollow-like Ryoka that beat Zaraki without a single scratch. He felt a little silly being watched so closely in a division that wasn't his own. He hadn't sparred in a dojo in so long, a wooden sword felt hilariously wrong. The kid, Shima Shimoda something, stood across from him in a stance that was a little too informal to be anything but a byproduct of the 11th. His expression set in determination and he rushed forward, Bakken over his head for a downward strike. Ichigo took a step to the side and brought his foot up to give the kid a gentle shove in the hips. In mid-turn, he was pushed off balance. The kid fell on his ass, scrambling to get back to his feet. There were some snickers, but he couldn't tell from who. Ichigo lifted the wooden sword to his shoulder and barked, "Can any of you do any better?" One of the more arrogant members stepped up, a stupid grin on his face. "I can take you." Ichigo huffed and scowled. "This is a waste of time. All of you come at me at once." They hesitated, uncertain if he was being serious or not, then all charged him, starting a one-sided brawl. Zangetsu laughed, pressuring Ichigo to let him out. "No, you'll kill someone. You're a fucking maniac." He easily dodged and parried, trying not to really hurt anyone. He settled for embarrassing them and making it clear they needed to get their shit together to get stronger. They weren't pathetic, but they were pretty weak. He ended up being the only one standing, sword on his shoulders, as a third of the 11th Division groaned on the floor. "Get better, weaklings." There was a resounding groan of dissent, but overall, Ichigo was pleased. Getting their asses kicked might be helpful, especially for the 11th. Ichigo turned to look, seeing Ikaku and Yumashika in the doorway. "I was wondering what all this shouting was about. You beat the shit out of our division." He was used to seeing the two together, it was a nostalgic sight. "That's what happens to weaklings." Ichigo countered. "You gonna do better, Ikaku." "Well duh, dumbass." He grabbed a bakken and stepped over a groaning Shinigami. He held it out in front of him and smirked. "You ready, Strawberry?" "You know that's not what my name means." Ichigo pouted. Bakken held ready. Ikaku looked like shit, but he hadn't beat him as bad as he had the first time, he knew he was fine. Akaku's face twisted into a grin that reminded him of Zangetsu and he rushed forward. Ichigo raised his sword to block a sudden side strike. He slid his foot in a semicircle, catching Ikaku behind the knee. Akaku's leg buckled, but he caught himself before he fell. He lashed out at Ichigo's head with the bakken and Ichigo ducked, pulling Akaku's leg out from under him as he completed his spin. He went down as Ichigo completed the motion with a left-handed punch aimed straight down at Akaku's face. The Fukutecho rolled out of the way, Ichigo's fist splitting the wood instead. Ikaku didn't waste time evading, he brought the bakken around toward Ichigo's neck. Ichigo raised his own practice sword to block, pushing Ikaku back and away. Instead of putting distance between them, Ichigo rushed closer, forcing Ikaku into close combat. It wasn't often he got to use his fists, and both of them were good enough with one hand on a sword to do it. They traded blows, Ichigo not much caring if Ikaku landed a hit, it didn't hurt much, if at all, his hierro instinctively protecting him even if he didn't intend to use it. The division members had relocated to the edges of the room, both flinging insults and cheering Ikaku on. Or maybe they were simply celebrating the violence, Ichigo couldn't tell. Ikaku wasn't all bark, he was good, when it boiled down to it. When they weren't pressuring each other with their Zanpakuto or Reiatsu, it was more than a little fun to simply test their skill. He found himself smiling, though his mood fell somewhat when he sensed Zaraki enter the room. He drew the trench knife, stopping Zaraki's sword short over his head. "Are you serious?" He didn't really need to guard himself, but he didn't think it would look good if a third of his division saw their own captain fail to scratch someone. And people said he didn't care. Ikaku stared at Zaraki, wide-eyed. "Taicho, you really should have expected this. We changed a lot of shit." "Can't change Zaraki." Zangetsu had a point. He hopped back from Ikaku, tossing the bakken to a random division member. Zaraki hefted his sword again, his division wisely getting out of the way. "You killed Aizen, right? I have to fight you. Didn't Yakiru tell you what I said?" "No." His face fell in annoyance and he dodged when Zaraki swung again. He sheathed the knife and lifted a hand in a half wave. "Thanks for the fight, Ikaku. See y'all later." Zaraki swung again, but he disappeared in a flash of shunpo, rapidly putting distance between them. Eventually he'd tire out, but until then, it was back to running. The nostalgia was nearly overpowering, and it put him in an odd mood. He'd returned to a walk when he ran into Ishida outside the barracks. Rather, Ishida had been looking for him all morning and had finally found him. When his Reiatsu appeared to most everyone to have disappeared entirely, he imagined it would be hard to find him. "What's up, Ishida?" "Don't play dumb, Kurosaki. I want answers." Ishida's shoulders were set in determination, brows furrowed, and Ichigo had promised. He didn't really have to think about it. Okay, but not here. Before Ishida could protest, he'd hoisted him up and over his shoulder. He used his combination of Shunpo and Sonido to cross the length of Seraiti, racing along the rooftops, then forming Reishi under his feet to run on the air. He was going too fast to hear any complaints if Ishida had any, but honestly, he wasn't sparing Ishida's pride by walking the entire way for what would probably be a brief conversation. It was only a couple of minutes before he stopped at the base of the waterfall above the hidden training ground he'd been at with Yoruichi. He dumped Ishida on the ground, who spat curses at him. He scrambled to his feet and snapped, "Was that necessary?" He brushed dust off of himself, readjusting his glasses and windblown hair. No need to shout, he grinned, finding Ishida amusing when he was disheveled and flustered. He turned and led the way in, the entrance still a bit ruined from Renji's careless posturing. And yes, it was. He stepped into empty space, landing at the bottom and waited for Ishida to take the ladder all the way down. It took another minute, but he had time to spare. He called up as he descended. "Urahara built this place with Yoruichi a long time ago. It's got some keto protection, and Soul Society doesn't know about it." Once Ishida reached the bottom, he gave Ichigo a look of concern. "Are you really that worried they'll overhear?" "Yes, my loyalties are already in question, and what we're about to discuss would only make that suspicion worse." He gestured at Ishida to continue. "Now ask. When we were breaking through the barrier to Seraiti, your Reiatsu was strange. It felt like two halves warring with each other. What was that?" And there it was. Glasses is too smart for his own damn good. Doesn't need to be smart to figure that out, he's creepily observant. Guard your words, Ichigo, do not tell him everything. Ichigo decided to answer Ishida with a small story. "My mother, Masaki, was a Quincy." Ishida's eyes widened in shock, even hinting on betrayal. He knew he still didn't like Shinigami, maybe he still hated them, and with just this information it would seem on the surface that he had given up his Quincy side to be a Shinigami. He only tolerated their existence because he could see they had a purpose, because he was being the better man. To find out Ichigo was one must be confusing. "I didn't know she was, not until after I became a Shinigami. Her soul was going to suicide after being infected by a hollow called White. A hollow Aizen created. Urahara made a Gigai for her that would stabilize her soul, but the hollow was always there. That hollow passed on to me when I was born. That's what you felt. My hollow Shinigami power was trying to balance with my Quincy power. It's a delicate balance, and one I'm naturally awful at." He watched Ishida carefully, waiting for him to say something. Ishida shifted and he couldn't see his eyes, the light reflecting off his glasses. He started to get uncomfortable, his brows furrowing. "Kurosaki, if your mother was a Quincy, and Urahara was helping her, does that mean?" Oja-san is a Shinigami." Ishida nodded curtly and asked, "So what Quincy abilities did you retain?" "Blood Vene is all I've used so far, and that was an accident. I mostly use my Quincy power to keep my hollow half suppressed. I end up using Blood Vene out of instinct alone if I need it." "If you need it, you don't need perfect defense." Ishida was understandably confused. "Usually my Hiero is enough to stop an attack, and my Bankai is fast. Very fast. I don't have any special abilities, I just get faster and stronger." Ishida didn't seem surprised in the slightest. "That makes sense given what I've observed of your ability. You're already above captain level in Zanjutsu and hand-to-hand, and it didn't appear most of the captains had the ability to track your Shunpo. I can't imagine how fast you were in Bankai, if you killed Aizen in Shikai." Ichigo was surprised he'd gathered all that just from being halfway across Seraiti, but he'd never doubted Ishida's intelligence. He deadpanned, "I'm fast." He went back to his previous train of thought. "How did you find out you're a Quincy?" Ichigo crossed his arms with a scowl. "That damn goat face sure as shit didn't tell me. I let out immense amounts of Reiatsu, it mixed with enemy Reiatsu, and something about awakening my blood. I dunno, I don't pay that close of attention. You were fighting another Quincy." This shocked Ishida even more than the rest, and Ichigo was unsurprised. There are more Quincies. I came back in time before they became a real nuisance, but they were strong, and they weren't on our side." He saw the look on his face. He was skeptical. He wanted to not be one of the last. He didn't want to rekindle false hope. He'd said too much. They were monsters, Ishida. And you're not. Ouch. Ichigo's expression darkened, and he tried not to let how badly that hurt show. He remembered almost killing his friend. He hadn't been conscious for it, but that was his failure, his weakness. This wasn't the same Ishida, but the guilt was still there. He swallowed. Fine, I'm a monster, but I'm not the kind of monster that casually kills their comrades and shows no mercy. There was more ice in his tone than he'd intended. He was feeling defensive. He knew this was a raw subject for Ishida, but he still had feelings. The conversation lapsed into uncomfortable silence, but Ichigo waited for Ishida to gather his thoughts. Ishida changed the subject. How do I get my power back? I told you, talk to your father. I might be a Quincy, but you're the only Quincy I actually know. Something seemed to occur to Ishida, his brows furrowing. You don't know about yourself. Ichigo was surprised. That was where his mind went. His eyes widened a fraction, unsure how to respond. He'd never confronted this. He hadn't had time. He'd just done what he'd always done and faced the challenge before him. No, my mother's family was killed. She was adopted into another family, I think, but I never learned whose. I just kind of figured things out as I went along. Where was I? Ichigo's eyes narrowed at a rush of misplaced sadness. Dead. Ishida didn't seem bothered by this. If anything, he appeared to be determined. This time I won't be dead. I'll get stronger, Kurosaki. I'll be there. I'll help if I can. You don't need to. Ishida, you always come up with some lame excuse as to why you're helping me, but you always help, you're always there. I never got to repay that debt. Give me the chance now. Whatever happened in your time, Kurosaki, hasn't happened here yet. You don't owe me. But I do. You came here to help save Rukia. I know a major reason you came was to protect Inu, but that fact still remains. Ishida blushed when he brought up Orihime, but he pretended not to notice. You lost your powers defeating Mayuri. You did something I don't think I could have done. Actually, he knew he couldn't have done it. He'd had his chance to use Mugetsu, and he'd failed. I know about what he did, Ishida, I understand. He didn't know if he'd missed on purpose, or hadn't had the resolve and now felt regret. Mayuri's expertise wasn't as trash as everyone made it out to be. He was valuable. But, knowing Mayuri had tortured Ishida's grandfather, he might have done a lot worse than Ishida. He would have. He had. He'd never liked Mayuri, but learning that had been the nail in the coffin. He reached up to rub the side of his neck, the sharp memory of a needle piercing his skin. It was in the past, Ichigo. We will not let it happen again. Ishida noticed the change, but didn't understand, so he didn't say anything. Ichigo let out a long, slow exhale, making the memories and the fear fade away with the last of his breath. I already owe you a lot, Ishida. The very least I can do is kick your ass until you get better. Ishida frowned and looked away, thoughtful. Ichigo's pride was on the line. He had to do this, and that appeared to be something Ishida understood. Ichigo said, get your powers back, and I'll help you. I think your asshole dad helped you train for a while, but I can give you experience against a Bankai, against a Vasto Lord. Vasto Lord, my hollow is Vasto Lord level. You should get used to fighting a hollow like that. There are some dumbasses in Hueco Mundo that are all brawn and no brain, but you never were very prepared to fight against raw instinct and power. Ishida's eyes narrowed. You make it sound like your hollow is someone else. Ichigo scratched his head. Sort of. You know how a Shinigami's Zanpakuto is both a part of them, but separate. I can materialize Zangetsu for you to fight. It'll be more educational. Zangetsu had mildly different Reiatsu, techniques, mannerisms. It really would be educational. Educational. He sounded skeptical, but he knew Ishida trusted his judgment. With anyone else he'd be worried they might break, but Ishida was tough. Ishida came to a decision. He pushed his glasses up on the bridge of his nose. Fine, you help me get stronger, and I'll help you control your Quincy power. At the very least, if you have blood vene, you should learn how to use blood artery and gather reishi. You'd be a disgrace to Quincy's if you didn't. Ichigo smiled. It wasn't a real insult, this was the Ishida he knew. Then it's a plan. Ready to go back. One more question. How did you learn to control your holo? I didn't. He's a part of me. He is me. Ishida seemed confused, so he explained further. He's Zangetsu. He jerked a thumb at the sword on his back. My holo fused with my Shinigami powers. They're one in the same. He put a hand on the trench knife and said, this knife is part of my Quincy power, but it's also Zangetsu. That's confusing, Kurosaki. He smiled. Good thing you're smart, 4 eyes. He knew that Ishida liked a good problem. If anyone could figure out his Quincy powers, it was him. They returned to the 11th the same way that they left, but he noted how much Ishida had relaxed. He felt a little better too. He'd never expected to find common ground with the Quincy, but they seemed to have found it. Ishida went off to go find something else to wear, or make something, and Ichigo went off on his own again. He still had plenty of time until he needed to go meet with Yama-jii, and he was stubbornly refusing to think about and or plan what he should say. He'd given reports before, but never one where he intended to purposefully withhold information. He was lost in his thoughts, wandering aimlessly around Seraiti. It was only early afternoon, he had a few hours to spare. He was so deep in his own thoughts, he didn't see what he was looking at. He was thinking about Aizen, about Shapooda Grants. His pink fucking hair, his immaculate fucking clothes, and his laugh. That laugh. He hated it. The fucker wouldn't shut the fuck up. He never shut up. He sensed someone behind him, whirling far too quickly for them to react. Ichigo. He had his hand on their chest, slamming them against the wall so hard it cracked under the force. His eyes widened when he saw white hair, staring back into warm, brown eyes. He let go immediately. Ukitake-san. He didn't look scared or startled, he looked worried. He didn't acknowledge the other Shinigami that took notice, he only turned and gestured. Come with me, Kurosaki-kun. He used Shunpo, expecting Ichigo to follow. For a second, Ichigo was too shocked to know what to do. Go with him, Ichigo. His brow furrowed and he chased after him, catching up quickly enough. The captain stopped on a walkway over the water in a garden. He set his hand on the railing and watched the fish a moment, then gave Ichigo a small smile. Ichigo's stomach flipped, wondering how he could smile at him like that. Don't despair, Kurosaki-kun. I thought I was prepared if you were to react badly. I overestimated myself. Try not to judge yourself too harshly. His heart was pounding, his anger clashing with his guilt and making him nauseous. What did you want to talk about, Ukitake-san? You heard I'm Rukia's superior. You saved my subordinate's life. You were faster than I was. You saved her from the Sokyoku and that monster. I want to return that favor. Kurosaki-kun, you remind me of me, and Rukia once we lost Kyan. He looked at him, pain in his eyes. You do look like him. You remind me of him. I know you're not him. Ichigo finally started to relax, standing beside Ukitake. I'm a Shiba, so that's not so surprising. He looked at him, wide-eyed. Ichigo felt it might be stupid to share too much, but it wasn't like he wouldn't know eventually. Kurosaki Aizen is my father. Shiba Aizen. Ukitake was shocked into silence, and Ichigo shrugged off his next questions. It's a long story. That explains much. He sighed and shook his head. But it isn't relevant. He looked over at Ichigo. I don't know what happened to you, and you aren't my subordinate, but I wanted you to know I'll always be here to listen if you need it. He closed his eyes and sighed. This is the first time I've talked to you at all, Kurosaki-kun, but I know guilt, and I know what hate looks like. You're not okay. Ichigo stiffened, eyes widening. He clenched his jaw, considering running. He'd been bluffing, shrugging off any concern, but this was the first time he'd been told he wasn't okay. When you stopped me, your eyes were black. He hadn't known that. He hadn't been doing anything but walking. How long had he been like that? A while, King. You weren't listening to us. That startled him more than anything. He leaned on the railing and swore, his fingers gripping into the wooden railing. Ukitake was silence, letting him absorb his thoughts. The serenity around him was only angering. He was falling apart, and everything continued on as usual. There is an errand car. Shapooda Grants. He spat the name in hate. Talking to Ishida was a reminder he couldn't shake. I fought against Neutra and barely scraped by. Zale captured me, and Hueco Mundo is a big place. He didn't stop, his expression twisting in rage. He stared down at the water, the dragonflies flitting over the surface. His voice was soft, afraid that saying it out loud would make it all some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Everything leads back to him, I can't get away from him. He's not dead here, he's not dead yet, and I want him dead. Ukitake didn't try to touch him again, he barely even moved. Kurosaki-kun, I don't know what he did, but you're still here, he didn't win. He knew Ukitake was struggling to find something to say that wouldn't only make things worse when he didn't know the whole story. I was only there for a little over a month, felt like longer. Ukitake said nothing, and he couldn't stop the words tumbling out. I won't let him get me again, but I'm still scared, and I hate it. You were rescued. No, he wasn't sure if it would have been better or worse if he had been. He'd been hoping someone would save him, but the only one he'd had was Zangetsu. I overpowered him and ran. He didn't know why he was so ashamed of that fact, but he was. How? I don't want to talk about it. His grip on the railing tightened, the wood splintering under his hands. He let it go with a soft apology, lifting a hand to rub at another headache. Then we won't. What do you want to talk about? He'd never known Ukitake that well, but he'd always liked him. He had a strong sense of justice and empathy, and he never thought he'd be leaning on it so heavily. I don't want to hurt anyone. He'd been lucky so far, and he'd only attacked people that were sturdy enough to take it. What if he killed someone? The fear was there, it haunted him. I'll see what I can do to help. He looked over at him. How are you sleeping? Badly. Ukitake didn't seem surprised. These are our problems you got mixed up in to begin with, it's our responsibility to help. Acceptance. Kurosaki-kun, I have a feeling you're aware of this, but you're digging in your heels. Anger feels good, it's safe for you, but not to those around you. Not when you're so strong. The Taicho turned toward him. You're not weak, that you're standing here and you care so deeply for your friends is proof you aren't. Ichigo hadn't realized how deep Ukitake's understanding might go. He always forgot just how many hundreds of years he'd been privy to. He looked away, blinking back the sting in his eyes. He was too used to others leaning on him, he wasn't used to leaning on others. Have you calmed down? Yeah, thanks, Ukitake-san. He looked back down at the water, voice nearly inaudible. I'm sorry. I should have known better. Just try to stay focused when you're out. He took his warning seriously, he knew what might have happened if he'd turned on anyone short of a captain. He could seriously hurt someone. I will, Ukitake-san. His voice held the steel of a promise, and Ukitake nodded in understanding. You know where to find me. Ichigo dipped his head in a nod, eager to spend some time alone before he had to face Yamamoto. If he saw he was slipping, he might try to order him to stay out of it, and he wouldn't let him do that. It might not be smart to want to face Zale again, but he wanted to be the one to kill him. He wanted to face his fears, even if the Octava Espada had yet to do anything in this timeline. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.